Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's wonderful to see you here for one of our concluding sessions for this year. We are really wrapping up soon. We have, I think, 3 sessions to go, and I'm delighted to be with you here. And thank you for joining us this morning as we continue to talk about the Aleinu, and as we wrap up our learning of prayer and of what prayer means to us and of what it is that we learn from prayer and how it is that we engage with the world and with our legacy, with our heritage through prayer. How is it that Jewish prayer is special? And how is it that Jewish prayer is really a reflection of humanity and reflects what really becomes not only the legacy of humanity, but the root of Judeo-Christian prayer. And we are entering into the 20th session. We are concluding now, this day, our 19th session, and we're going to be entering our 20th in the week to come. And I think that we are able to start thinking about this and are able to start to put some of these connections in place, starting from the work that we did on Birkot HaShachar, on the morning blessings, and the tension between those blessings being intended to be immediate personal blessings with regard to our good fortune to be alive, to be awake, to be able to stand, to be able to go through our day, and the formality of prayer in the synagogue and putting them together in one corpus of blessings for the sake of the synagogue and for the sake of the greater community. All the way through the Baruch Hu and the connections that we made relating to the Baruch Hu and generations past and the world beyond us that we no longer have access to the Shema, and the Shema as a pledge of allegiance that was created in the context of an ancient Near Eastern culture of pledges of allegiance, to the Amidah and the Kedusha that we spoke about, and our perception of redemption in the context of the Kedusha, to the Kaddish and the mourner's Kaddish that we spoke about, and how it is that the mourner's Kaddish comes to be, and how it is that it is connected, associated with Christian prayer, how it is that the mourner's Kaddish is a difficult, challenging, and magnificent text that indicates a separation and a loss on the one hand, and that on the other allows us at its conclusion to stand firmly and to express our faith in peace and in love and in goodness. And now to the Aleinu that we've been discussing. So, as I have done on previous occasions, I want to offer you a little bit of a warning that today will yet again be one of those challenging sessions of quite a bit of text and of difficult text. But a really important session, because today we are finally, I think, going to truly understand the Aleinu. We're finally going to at least conclude our introduction to the Aleinu and understand why it is, where it is in our service toward the conclusion of our service, and why it is such an important text. So, as always, I will start with a little bit of an introduction, and following the introduction, we will move forward. And as always, I'm going to ask you to please indicate to me if you have any questions here while I am speaking, and I'm going to try to take your questions at various intervals and respond to them. And to those of you who are joining us from home, I welcome you here too, and I look forward to hearing from you during and after this session. Let's start, if that's okay. So, by way of introduction, the Aleinu, we said already a couple of weeks back, is a late addition to our service. The Aleinu was composed in the High Middle Ages. And it was likely composed in the High Middle Ages following the killing of Jews in the context of the Crusades, the destruction of entire Jewish communities. Not only the destruction of Jews and Jewish communities, but a kind of brutality towards Jews that we had never seen in Europe before. The kind of brutality that reminded the Jews of Europe of the destruction of the temple, of stories that they had grown up with, of memories they didn't have, but collective memory that they had reconstructed, of destruction past. And the Aleinu is, in a certain sense, not only a reaction to the destruction, but an attempt to process and to remain Jewish following that destruction. The Aleinu becomes part of Jewish liturgy in the 12th, and then spreads as part of Jewish liturgy in the 13th and into the 14th centuries. So it's a late addition to our service, and it comes to our service at the very end. The Aleinu and the Orphans Kaddish, the Kaddish Yatom, are associated in our minds. The Aleinu comes at the end of the Torah service, at the end of the service, around the time that we utter the Kaddish. And there's a reason for that, and we're eventually going to have an opportunity to think about it. We started looking into the Aleinu in terms of some of the forms of words, the formulae in Hebrew that are used in the Aleinu. We looked at the notion of Mishpechot HaAdamah, the families of the earth, through the blessing of Abraham and the blessing of Jacob and the prophecy of Amos. And we saw how these families of the earth phrase, how these words are used, both in the Hebrew Bible and in the Talmud. And we saw how difficult and interesting they are. How on the one hand they link us as Jews to everyone in the world, to the universal family of humanity. And how on the other hand they're also used to separate us from others. We also looked at other forms of words, right? We looked at kechol hamonam, their multitudes, the notion of the multitudes, of power in masses of people, and how that was used only in one place in the Hebrew Bible, in the prophecy of Isaiah with regard to the Egyptians. And we looked at the words hevel varik, emptiness, void, superficiality, also in the context of the Judean reliance on the Egyptians. A reliance that would be futile, that would not function. The Egyptians would not be able to defend the Judeans from the Babylonian onslaught, not from the Assyrian onslaught, and eventually not from the Babylonian onslaught. And we saw that, and we saw how these phrases were used. And we're coming to a point today where we're going to be able to start discussing and start thinking about how it is that in a world in the context of which we are living and we're benefiting from the blessings of the world, we're also experiencing and remembering destruction. And how is it that in this world we can ask ourselves, how is it we pray for redemption? What is the nature of that redemption? How is it that we stand up and give thanks and pray to God and maintain our hope alive? I think this is the question. How do we pray for redemption in the world? That is the core question that the Aleinu comes to respond to, that the Aleinu tries to address. Yes? So, may we proceed? Is this okay? Does this sound familiar? Does this sound like a review of what we had done before? Yes? Is it okay for us to proceed? Let us proceed. I want to go to the prophecy of the one prophet, the one really complicated prophet, who really inspires the Aleinu. I'm going to say a few words about this before we go to the next slide. That prophet is Zechariah. Zechariah is one of the so-called minor prophets, one of the 12 minor prophets. We know relatively little about Zechariah. We believe that Zechariah is not one prophet, but is at least two. The book has a dozen or so chapters. It doesn't matter, 14 chapters. The book of Zechariah is one of those books that are clearly divided into two parts. And Zechariah, in part, is believed to be a second temple prophet, a relatively late prophet, but there are elements of Zechariah that look really old because they refer to things that seem to have taken place as far back as the 8th century before the Common Era, before the destruction of the kingdom of Israel, before the destruction of the kingdom of Judah, during the time of the first temple. So we believe that the prophet Zechariah is really more than one prophet, but that it's a collection of texts, including very old texts and very old memories, as well as texts that date from the Second Temple period, hundreds of years later. What we're going to look at is the very end of Zechariah, the last 3 chapters of Zechariah, 12, 13, and 14, snippets of which, parts of which, I want to bring to you today. The very end of the book of Zechariah features very prominently in the Aleinu. And if we are to understand the Aleinu, we have to understand Zechariah. Now, Zechariah is difficult, I warn you, and it's painful. So for those of you who don't feel like this is the right thing for you today, you have been warned. I'm telling you now, this is not easy stuff. But I didn't write it. It's there in our Hebrew Bible. Zechariah. Starting on chapter 12. Does anyone have chapter 12 of that? Do you know the page number for chapter 12? 1096. Thank you, Alan. 1096. Chapter 12 of Zechariah. Remarkable, absolutely remarkable. Zechariah here offers us his last and sustained prophecy, which talks about the final redemption. The redemption with a capital R. And how that redemption with a capital R is going to take place. And that prophecy, I'm going to suggest to you, is divided into 3 parts. One is an introduction and summary. The second relates to the spiritual change that is going to take place during redemption. And the third gives us more detail with regard to that redemption and what that redemption is going to look like. We're going to start with the first part. I'm going to try to do this relatively quickly. Masa Dvar Adonai, Zechariah writes, the burden, the weight of the word of God to Israel, for Israel. That God that stretched out the heavens, that created the earth, that gave us breath. And Zechariah writes, see, believe me, I will make Jerusalem a bowl of poison. And it actually, the word here is poison in Hebrew, for the peoples all around. And I'm sorry, I apologize in advance for the translation. Judah shall be afflicted, there will be a siege upon Jerusalem. All the nations of the earth will gather against Jerusalem. This is the final battle, the final war that is going to precede redemption. You can feel part of what is going to happen here in the prophecy of Zechariah. On that day, I will make Jerusalem a stone for all the peoples to lift. A burden, a stone that everybody will try to pick up, and everyone who touches it, all the peoples who try to lift it, all the armies that try to lift it will be scratched, will be injured while trying to lift it. Everybody will be injured in the process. Everybody will eventually bleed through this process. I will cause panic among the armies. I'm skipping a whole number of different things. I will cause panic among the horses and the horsemen. I will cause panic among the people. I will keep my eye on Judah and Jerusalem, says Zechariah. The leaders of Judah will say, in their hearts, the dwellers of Jerusalem gather courage. This is the word ometz, aleph mem tzadi, the notion of strength, courage, fortitude, resilience in their God, the God of hosts. This is what is going to happen in this colossal world war that will gather around Jerusalem and in Jerusalem. On that day, I will make the leaders of Judah like a flaming brazier among the sticks and like a flaming torch among the sheaves. And they will go out and defeat the besieging people. They will inflict casualties on them, right and left. And Jerusalem will somehow survive, and we will see how it will happen. God will give victory to the tents of Judah first on that day, and then God will shield the inhabitants of Jerusalem. The feeblest of them, the weakest of them will be like David, who destroyed Goliath. And the house of David like a divine being, like an angel of God at their head. In the conclusion or in the context of this battle of battles, the war of wars. On that day, I will all but annihilate all the nations that came up against Jerusalem, says Zechariah. Here is the expression of the faith in the cult of Jerusalem. God will protect Jerusalem. Redemption will take place in Jerusalem. It will be anchored in Jerusalem. And the instruments of redemption will be the people of Judah, the house of David, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. But not so simple. Not simple, not quick, really difficult, and really painful. There's a war, a terrible, terrible war that's going to take place. Part 2. I will fill the house of David, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, with a spirit of pity and compassion. The people of Jerusalem, the people of Judah, the people of the house of David will be spiritually changed. They will become different people. They will have empathy. They will have compassion. They will feel pain. They will be able to mourn. They will be able to support each other. This is the spiritual change that is going to take place. People are going to see each other. And they will lament about those who are slain. They will wail over them. The wailing in Jerusalem will be as great as the wailing in Hadad Rimon in the plain of Megiddon. Megiddon is Megiddo with a nun at the very end. The land shall wail, each family by itself. People will mourn their losses. The family of the house of David, the family of the house of Nathan, all the other families, and it gives a long list of families, but all the other families, family, each and every one by itself, with the women by themselves. And on that day, the implication is cleansing, purification will start. It will start from pain. It will start from mourning. It will start from loss. It will start from our crying. It will start from empathy. From our ability to see each other. And from our ability to see what is going on in the world. And then cleansing and purging will start. And God says, I will erase the names of the idols from the land. They shall be uttered no more. The names of Baal and Asherah, the names of all the idols of the Canaanites and of the Assyrians and of the Babylonians. Names, by the way, if I may, that we no longer remember, will be uttered no more. And I will make the prophets, the so-called prophets, and the unclean of spirit vanish from the land. And if anyone prophesies and makes a false prophecy, people will catch them, including their own parents. Say, what are you doing? All those commentators who want to comment for the sake of fashion, fad, looking good, being popular, lots of followers on TikTok. We will catch them. We will say, wait a minute. Where is the spirit in what you are saying? Where is the transcendent wisdom Where is the vision? We will be able, therefore, to discern between prophecy and false prophecy, between the true comment and the superficial, and the plain false. On that day, false prophets will be ashamed of their visions. On that day, false prophets will hide. They will deny. They will deceive. They will say, oh, it wasn't me. Oh, look, no, not me. I had nothing to do with this. They will say, oh, look at me. You know, I'm just a farmer. I am a tiller of the soil. I was gifted the labor of livestock from my youth. In other words, I was gifted the gift of agriculture from Cain and Abel, from, the beginnings of humanity. Look at me, I'm just a farmer. Remember when we talked about the families of the earth and our relationship to the land? Look at Zechariah. And if people come to the prophet, the false commentator, and say, wait a minute, who beat you? What are these markings on your back? They will deny. Oh, I was just beaten in the home of my friends. It was an accident. I fell off a chair. We come to part 3. In the land of Judah, 2/3 shall perish, and only 1/3 will survive. The majority of our people will perish. Only a minority, a remnant, will survive. Sound familiar? That third I will put into the fire, into the divine spiritual fire, and I will purify them as one smelts silver and tests them as one tests gold. The remnants will be purified. They will be spiritually changed. They will invoke me by name, and I will respond to them, says God. I will be there for them. They will be here for me, and I will be there for them. The cost is going to be near unbearable, but then I will be here. I will declare, you are my people, and they will declare, the sovereign is our God. The day of the Lord, the day of God is coming, when your spoil shall be divided in your very midst. The only thing we will be able to truly celebrate is survival. Not easy. Not easy stuff. Now, it gets more complicated. And in certain ways for us, more interesting. I will gather the nations to Jerusalem for war. The city will be captured, the houses plundered. The rest of the population shall not be uprooted from the city. God will come forth and make war on those nations. God will set on the Mount of Olives. And when God sets on the Mount of Olives, a mountain outside Jerusalem, will split into two. Two parts, one to the south and one to the north, and a huge gap will arise in the middle of the mountain, between the north and the southern part of the mountain. Do you know why the Mount of Olives has the single largest and oldest Jewish cemetery in the world on it? Do you know about this? You know that the Mount of Olives outside, on the eastern side, to the east of the old city of Jerusalem, has so many graves, Jewish graves on it. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of Jewish graves on it. Members of my own family are buried on the Mount of Olives. Do you know why? Because in our Jewish faith, in the tradition that our ancestors, that our parents and grandparents believed in for all these years and generations, the announcer of the Messiah will come through the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives will collapse and break into two. A huge valley will be created between the two parts of the Mount of Olives, and the dead will rise. This is the beginning of redemption. The Messiah will then make its way to the gates of mercy, the gate of mercy of the city of Jerusalem, the walled city of Jerusalem. The gates which to this day are blocked by huge blocks of stones. There is no gate there. It's just part of the wall. And the gate will miraculously open, and the Messiah will enter into the Temple Mount. That is why we have that cemetery on the Mount of Olives. This is what will happen according to Zechariah. But according to Zechariah, this will be an enormous earthquake, and everyone in the valleys will flee to the hills, to the mountains. And the valley here, right outside Jerusalem, where today the village of Siloam resides, will be blocked the way it was blocked in the tremor that we date to the 8th century before the Common Era. In the time of King Uzziah of Judah. On that day, it will be neither day nor night. On that day, it will just be continuous, some kind of light, and only God knows when, during this time that is neither day nor night, there shall be some kind of light at eventide, and suddenly fresh water from Jerusalem, the water of life, will start to flow both to the east, in other words, to the Dead Sea, and to the west, in other words, to the Mediterranean. Jerusalem will become the source of the spring of life, the water of life. And that water will not cease during the winter and during the summer, which, by the way, is not the case today. And the sovereign shall reign over all the earth. Bayom hahu yihiyeh Adonai echad u'shmo echad. On that day, God will be one and God's name will be one. This is our Aleinu. This is the conclusion of our Aleinu. Never again shall destruction be decreed. and Jerusalem will dwell secure. This is it. This is redemption with a capital R. There will be no day, there will be no night. Fresh water will come out of Jerusalem. The people will have been transformed. Everybody will have been purified. In this prophecy of the end of days, following this apocalypse, following this horrific war. For those people that warred against Jerusalem, God will smite them. And confusion will reign. But all who survive and all of those nations that came up against Jerusalem and who now see the light, not only the Judeans, not only the house of Israel, all the nations, everybody will come to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage and bow low to the sovereign God to observe the feast of Sukkot, the time of our rain, the time of the replenishing of the water of life that will spring out of Jerusalem. Everybody will come up to Jerusalem. And those who do not will receive no rain. Everybody will have to recognize the sovereignty of God. And eventually, the metal pots in the house of God, just the simple metal pots, the regular metal pots in the house of God, will be holy to the God of hosts. And on that day, and this is the very end of the book of Zechariah, there will be no more Canaanites. There will be no more idolaters, people who are truly idolaters in the house of God. The prophecy of Zechariah. Not only the prophecy of Zechariah, but the prophecy of Zechariah, 3 chapters in under 25 minutes. What is this redemption? What is this redemption we're talking about? When is this redemption going to take place? When are we going to see the mountains split into 2? When is the water of life going to flow out of Jerusalem? When are we going to be spiritually changed? Truly spiritually changed. Touched by empathy, by the ability to see each other. When are we truly going to understand unity? One God, one humanity, one creation, one world. When is this really going to take place? When are we going to be able to discern true comment, true prophecy from superficialities, from the false? When is there going to be no day and no night? When is it that we're not going to know whether it is day or night? When is this going to take place? What, have we not had enough war? Have we not had enough destruction? Have we not had enough death and injury and mourning and crying? Have we not had enough? So Ellen Ellen is saying, and I'm going to say this for the benefit of people back home, Ellen is saying, maybe not yet. Maybe not yet. And what will it take for redemption with a capital R to finally arrive, for change to finally occur, for our hearts to change, for our willingness to create a true Jerusalem with a capital J, out of which the water of life will flow in all directions, to the desert and to the sea. I'm going to stop here for a moment, and I see a number of people wanting to comment. So I'm going to go around, if I may. Did you want to say something, Helga? Helga is asking the question, and I'm going to paraphrase the question, if I may. If I may. No, you found wonderful words. The words that Helga uttered, I'm going to paraphrase in the following way. We have suffered plenty, and there was no justice. The righteous and those who were less than righteous were treated the same way. And what will it take? And when is this redemption going to come? And the people who composed the Aleinu, who said, Bayom Ahu, Yihye Adonai Echad U'Shmo Echad, who wrote on that day, quoting Zechariah, were asking the very same question. What will it take? Why are we not there? Why are we not experiencing this? I'm going to get to this in one moment. We're going to move forward, and we're going to move forward with this following Zechariah. Yes, Margie. So Margie is pointing out that some of this language of destruction, especially for the enemies of Judah and the house of David and Israel, is reminiscent of the part of the Haggadah that Reformed Judaism has excised. It has taken out of the Haggadah, saying, Shfoch hamatcha al hagoyim asher lo yedaucha, pour out your wrath, we call unto God, upon these nations who did not know you, and so on and so forth. There is some of that. There is some of that. Except here, we are not in charge in Zechariah. We are not calling for it. It's going to happen. It's God's prophecy. It's going to be the war with a capital W, and eventually redemption with a capital R of those who remain. And not many will remain. Right? And yes, it is reminiscent. It is reminiscent. You're absolutely right, Margie. But the Shfoch hamatcha, pour out your wrath, is our calling upon God. And here, what we have is Zechariah's prophecy, and that's what I'm pointing out. Right? Marie. This is a collective redemption. Yes, Marie, thank you. This is a collective redemption, please. Yeah. Do I really believe this? That's a really interesting question. You know, Many of us have lived through a lot. I have lived through a little bit. I don't know whether this is something that I am willing to wholeheartedly subscribe to. And I don't know that I'm also willing to abandon the notion that we are capable of spiritual transformation and of goodness and of redemption. Well, that's a really interesting question. The question is, why would the world change? We haven't seen it change. We haven't seen it function this way. We know how the world has functioned thus far. What are we doing setting ourselves up to believe in something that is not going to happen? In the kind of change that is not going to take place. But if this is the case, and if the world is not going to change, what are we here for? So this is not a midrash. This is a prophecy. This is a prophecy out of the book of Zechariah, who probably experienced the destruction of the temple, and who probably thought to himself, unless we believe in redemption and in goodness and in justice, unless we believe in empathy, unless we believe that we can transform, what hope do we have? Why would we gather in our synagogues? If we are going to pray, what are we to pray for? For the broken world to continue as it is? For us to each try to do our best in our own corners? Care for our children? Care for our families? Do our best? Try to get a nicer car? One more and then I will move forward, yes. Thank you. When are we going to, I'm going to repeat the question, which is a valid question. The question is well put. What are we doing believing in a changed world when we know the world? We experience the world. And when are we going to have the discernment to identify prophecy from false prophecy? To identify the true, the valuable, the transcended, the spiritually elevating from the rest. And maybe that lack of discernment is what leads us astray. And I think that's exactly right. And right in the middle of this prophecy is the issue of the false prophets. This is absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Yes. Helga, I will get back to you in a moment. Yes. So let's order our chronology. Thank you for the question. Wonderful question. The period of the Babylonian Talmud starts, I'm going to say this differently. There is a Babylonian Judean community, proto-Jewish community, that is created with the destruction of the first temple. These people had experienced destruction and remembered the destruction and kept the memory of that destruction alive. A number of these people, not everybody, but a number of them moved back to the land of Israel and were among those who built the second temple and participated in the creation of a second Judean commonwealth with Jerusalem and the temple at its center. The period of the Babylonian Talmud occurs following the destruction of the second temple, with remnants of the Judeans fleeing, including to Babylonia, and the learning leading from the Mishnah to the creation of the Babylonian Talmud in the early Middle Ages, during the time of the Sasanian Empire. Ashkenazi Jews only settle in the Rhine Valley in the 8th or 9th centuries to the Common Era. At the very, very conclusion, after the Babylonian Talmud is already composed, at the very conclusion of that period. Ashkenazi Jewry, in this respect, in Germany and Eastern France, in Western Germany and Eastern France, is approximately, from now, looking back, 1600 years old, 15 to 1600 years old. That occurs after the Babylonian Talmud. The pain that they experience with the Crusades, 1096, 1097, 1098, 1099, 1144, 1145, the horrors that they experience through the end of the 11th century, the 12th century, middle of the 12th century, end of the 12th century, what they experience reminds them of things they had heard in the past. We're going to get to the Babylonian Talmud in a moment. Thank you for that question. A very important question. I will get to the Babylonian Talmud in one moment. Okay, we're going to move to that side. Maida, did you have? Okay. Etty? Mm-hmm. There is no Messiah. There is no Messiah. There is no return to life here. There is the breaking of the Mount of Olives. At this time, there is no cemetery. There is no great cemetery in the Mount of Olives. Right? Why, Etty, does this confuse you? And let me help somehow dispel part of that confusion. The myth that you speak of, the religion you speak of, the sentiment that you speak of, all arise after the prophecy of Zechariah. Zechariah is not familiar with the notion of the revival of the dead. Zechariah is not familiar with that notion of the Messiah who will come back. The Jews today subscribe to that notion that came up later, that Zechariah did not yet know. Right? No, it came up later between the period, the biblical period, and the Talmudic period. It starts in the book of Daniel and proceeds following the book of Daniel. But this is not Zechariah. Zechariah did not know of it. The authors of the Aleinu are asking themselves the question, how do we pray for redemption? They're asking themselves the question, what are we praying for? And how do we bring ourselves to believe in redemption, knowing the world as the world is? And on the other hand, if we do not believe in redemption, what are we doing here? Why are you here? Why are you here? Helga, I know you wanted to say something, but I would like to continue for a little bit, and then we will come back to our questions. I want to end with the Babylonian Talmud. Tractate Makot. In the order of Sanhedrin, Makot means punishments. The punishments that occur following judicial processes, following the finding of someone as liable or guilty. This is the very end of the Babylonian Talmud Tractate Makot. These are the last pages. The page 24 is the last page of Tractate Makot. It is said of Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Akiva, speaking of the Haggadah, rabbis who are also mentioned in the Haggadah, that they were walking along the road in the Roman Empire and they heard the sound of the multitudes of Rome from a city at a distance of 120 miles. The city was so large that they were able to hear the noise of the city from such a huge distance. And the sages began to weep. And Rabbi Akiva started to laugh. And they said to him, "Why are you laughing?" And he said to them, "Why are you weeping?" And they said, "Look, these idolaters, these people who bow to false gods and burn incense to idols, they dwell securely and quietly in this colossal city. And our city, Jerusalem, and the house of God, and we have experienced the most horrific destruction. And we have been destroyed. What do you mean we shall not weep? Why should we not weep? We must weep." And Rabbi Akiva said to them, "This is exactly why I'm laughing. If for these people, these idolaters who violate God's will, this is the reward for the very few good deeds, the little good that they do, if this is their reward, imagine how we will be rewarded. How true believers will eventually be rewarded." And then there's another story. And the other story is that the very same rabbis were ascending to Jerusalem. And when they arrived at the Mount Scopus, which is a mountain where the Hebrew University is housed today, from which, it's by the way the highest mountain to the east of Jerusalem, from which you have a really great view of the old city of Jerusalem. They saw the site of the temple, and they rent their garments in mourning. And then, when they arrived at the Temple Mount, they saw a fox that emerged from the place where the Holy of Holies had been. And they started weeping. And Rabbi Akiva started laughing. And they said to Rabbi Akiva, "Why are you laughing?" And he said to them, "Why are you weeping?" And they said, "This is the site of the Holy of Holies that the priests were not allowed to enter into. And a fox, an animal, is coming in and out of this space, and we will not weep? Of course we weep. And Rabbi Akiva said to them, this is also why I'm laughing. Now here we come back to the prophecy of Zechariah. There are two prophecies that Rabbi Akiva cites. Uriah the priest and Zechariah. What is the connection between the prophecies of Uriah and Zechariah? Uriah prophesied during the first temple period, and Zechariah prophesied during the second temple period. And they were among those who returned from Zion to Zion from Babylonia. The fulfillment of the prophecy of Zechariah is dependent on the fulfillment of the prophecy of Uriah. Uriah said, Zion will be destroyed, it will be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem will become rubble. And that is recorded in the prophecy of the prophet Micah, also among the minor prophets. We know this happened, we know this became true, we know this was realized. So if the prophecy of Uriah was realized, then perhaps the prophecy of Zechariah in chapter 8 of the book, there shall yet be elderly men and elderly women sitting in the streets of Jerusalem, that should be realized too. If the prophecy of the destruction was realized, the prophecy of the redemption will too be realized. And the sages turned to Rabbi Akiva and said to Rabbi Akiva, you comfort us. You comfort us. And I want to tell you, I think that this is the meaning of the Aleinu. I think the Aleinu comes to demonstrate to us that our world is not redeemed, and that redemption is far away, and that we are challenged to believe in the redemption with a capital R, because we know the world we inhabit. But the Aleinu is here to remind us that our mothers and fathers, our grandmothers and grandfathers believed in redemption. They believed in goodness. They believed in our ability to be spiritually elevated. They believed in our ability to change the world. And that the authors of the Aleinu wanted to comfort us. And the way Tractate Makot ends, I think, is the true lesson of the Aleinu. Our faith in redemption, however we can try to believe in it, offers some kind of comfort in spite of everything occurring in our world. That redemption is not here, not quite yet. It was not here for the authors of the Aleinu. But they just had to find a way to get up in the morning, to continue with their day, to move forward, to hope, and to pray. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. So thank you for joining me.